As part of a grassroots campaign spearheaded by the California Apartment Association, more than 5,800 rental housing providers sent email messages to members of the Senate Judiciary Committee urging a no vote on SB 466 by Senator Aisha Wahab, a Democrat out of Hayward. Unfortunately, a majority of the committee members didn't listen. On Tuesday, April 18th, the committee advanced this anti-housing legislation to the full Senate floor, with some amendments, which we'll talk about in a bit.
This is file item number 20, SB 466 by Senator Wahab. The motion is due pass, 7-1.
7-1, that'll go on call. All right.
At its core, SB 466 is an attack on the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, which is the most important rental housing protection law in California. Let's talk about one of the most important elements of Costa-Hawkins. Costa-Hawkins prohibits local rent control from applying to newer housing. And that's defined in Costa-Hawkins as housing with a certificate of occupancy after February 1st, 1995. Now, if a city already had rent control when Costa-Hawkins passed, then no housing built after the enactment date of that rent control ordinance can fall under local rent control. So in San Francisco, for example, rent control passed in June of 1979. So no housing built after June 1979 is subject to San Francisco's rent control law. So owners of apartments throughout California, especially in cities with rent control, have operated for years knowing that their units, if built after 1995, or in San Francisco's case, 1979, that those units would never be subject to local rent control laws. Well, that's about to change if SB 466 becomes law. Hobbs' bill would do away with the 1995 definition of new housing for apartments, and it would replace it with a 28-year rolling date. So starting next year, assuming this passes, housing with a certificate of occupancy of February 1st, 1996 would be eligible for local rent control. And the year after that, it would just roll forward to February 1st, 1997, and so on and so on. So units that the owners of which thought would never be under local rent control would indeed be under these ordinances. In San Francisco, instead of 1979 being the new construction cutoff, next year under Wahab's bill, it would be not 1980, but 1981. This bill is as confusing as it is bad. This amendment for pre-Costa-Hawkins rent control cities would have the new construction definition advance 2 years every year until it gets to 1995, and then it would be 1 year every year. Very, very confusing. So all this new housing that was supposed to be exempt from rent control in perpetuity is being folded into very strict rent control ordinances. Here's Deborah Carlton, CAA's Executive Vice President for State Government Affairs, testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee earlier this week, and she talks about that 28-year rolling date.
But with Senate Bill 466, if owners buy rental housing that's coming up to the 15 years or the rolling date, as you are suggesting, they will be under the strict forms of rent control immediately. What that means is Senate Bill 466 will put housing under local rent control with rent caps as low as 2%. That doesn't even cover your property taxes. It doesn't cover the increases that are coming with other fees that are being imposed on rental property owners at the local level.
The version of SB 466 headed to the Senate floor has been amended in a few ways. Originally, Wahab wanted to eliminate the exemption under the Costa-Hawkins Act for single-family homes. That's gone now. So even if this does pass, single-family homes would remain exempt from local rent control laws. Originally, Wahab also wanted to have a 15-year rolling date. She's amending it to 28 years. Also an important note about this bill, it does not affect the ban on vacancy control in Costa-Hawkins. So the bill would not affect the ability of landlords to raise rents on rent-controlled units up to market rate between tenancies. That stays. Now, all this said, even with these amendments, this is still a very negative bill, and CAA remains opposed. It's also what we consider to be an anti-housing bill. The very idea of tinkering with that 1995 date in Costa-Hawkins has a chilling effect on development of residential housing. Developers want certainty. And if the 1995 date is replaced with a rolling date of 28 years, who's to say next year it won't be amended to 15 years, or the year after that to 5 years? It really does open the door to controlling rents at the city and county level in a very strict way on new construction. And that makes it an anti-housing bill. For updates on SB 466, be sure to visit caanet.org, where you'll get both updates on this legislation plus ways you can help to fight it.